The morning of Marcus' wedding started like every other family gathering in the past 5 years, with a phone call from my mother explaining why I needed to dress appropriately and try not to embarrass the family. I was standing in my hotel room at the Fairmont, looking at the mustard-yellow bridesmaid dress Patricia had specifically chosen for me, when Mom called with her final instructions. "Emma, sweetheart, I know this is hard for you," she said in that tone she'd perfected, part sympathy, part condescension. Being around all of Marcus' successful friends, seeing Patricia's family with their achievements. Just remember that not everyone can be a doctor or lawyer. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied, zipping up the dress that made me look like a diseased banana. "And please don't mention your job situation unless someone asks directly. It's Marcus Day, and we don't want people feeling uncomfortable." My job situation. That's what the family called it now. Not my career, not my work, my situation. Like it was a medical condition that required delicate handling. The truth was, I'd built Anderson Global Logistics into a $4.2 billion supply chain management company that employed over 85,000 people across 47 countries. We handled distribution for 30% of the Fortune 500, had revolutionized cold chain logistics for pharmaceutical companies, and were 3 days away from closing the largest merger in our industry's history. But to my family, I worked at a grocery store. It had started innocuously enough. 7 years ago, when I was building my first distribution center, I'd worked nights at a Safeway to understand every aspect of food retail from the ground up. I wanted to know how products moved from suppliers to shelves, how inventory management worked at store level, how customer demand shifted week to week. Most executives learn this stuff from spreadsheets and consultants. I learned it by scanning barcodes and stocking shelves from midnight to 6 a.m. When family asked about work during those early years, I'd say I was in food retail or working in supply chain logistics. Somehow, this got translated into Emma works at a grocery store. And once that narrative took hold, it was impossible to correct without seeming like I was lying or delusional. The first time I tried to explain what Anderson Global actually did, Uncle Richard had patted my shoulder and said, "That's great, honey. It's good that you're ambitious about your grocery store job." When I mentioned hiring my first 100 employees, Aunt Susan had nodded supportively. "Oh, are you managing a department now? That's wonderful progress." Eventually, I stopped trying to correct them. It was easier to let them think what they wanted than to deal with their skepticism. And honestly, part of me was curious to see how long they could maintain their delusions about my life. The answer, apparently, was indefinitely. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been particularly brutal. Patricia's family were genuine achievers. Her father had built a successful construction company. Her brother had just sold his tech startup for $50 million. Her mother was a federal judge. They were warm, accomplished people who clearly expected Marcus' family to be equally impressive. "So, Emma," Patricia's brother Jason had asked during cocktails, "Marcus mentioned you work in food service. Are you planning to open your own restaurant?" Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in. "Oh no, Emma's not the entrepreneur type. She works at a grocery store. It's honest work, though." The slight pause in conversation was painful. Jason recovered quickly. He was too polite to show surprise, but I saw Patricia's parents exchange a glance. They were clearly wondering how a family that included doctors, lawyers, and business owners had produced someone whose biggest achievement was apparently avoiding unemployment. "Food retail is fascinating," I said simply. "The logistics alone are incredibly complex." "I'm sure," Patricia's father replied kindly, before immediately changing the subject to Marcus' law practice. Later that evening, I overheard Patricia's mother talking to my mother by the hotel bar. "Patricia mentioned Emma might be godmother to their children someday," she'd said carefully. "Oh, Emma would love that," Mom had replied. "She's wonderful with kids. Of course, she's not in a position to be much of a financial influence, but she's very loving." Financial influence. Well, she's still finding her way professionally. We help her out when we can. Family takes care of family. I'd left the bar after that and spent the rest of the evening in my room reviewing acquisition reports, and trying to remember why I'd thought attending this wedding was a good idea. The morning of the ceremony brought fresh humiliations. During hair and makeup, the other bridesmaids, Patricia's sister and two college friends, were discussing their careers. One was a pediatric surgeon, another was launching her second startup, and the third was a partner at a consulting firm. "And Emma works in grocery," Patricia had explained when they asked about me. "She's been doing that for years now." "Oh," the surgeon had said politely. "That must be stable work." "Very stable," I agreed, not mentioning that Anderson Global's stability came from having exclusive contracts with every major food retailer in North America. When they asked about my travel plans, I said I didn't have any scheduled, instead of explaining that I'd be in Singapore next week finalizing a $1.8 billion merger, followed by board meetings in London and a factory opening in Bavaria. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful. Patricia looked radiant in her grandmother's lace dress, and Marcus seemed genuinely happy. I stood at the altar holding the bridal bouquet, trying to focus on their joy instead of the whispered comments from various relatives about my appearance. "Poor Emma," Aunt Susan murmured. "That color is so unflattering on her." "The dress isn't the problem," someone whispered back. "It's the stress. Financial pressure ages you." I maintained my smile even when the photographer positioned me slightly behind the other bridesmaids, for composition. Everyone knew it was to minimize the visual impact of the family member who didn't quite fit. The reception was held in the Fairmont's Grand Ballroom, a beautiful space I'd actually considered purchasing 2 years ago, before deciding the location wasn't right for my real estate portfolio. The dinner was excellent, though I barely tasted it as I endured toast after toast that managed to celebrate everyone's achievements except mine. "To Patricia's family," Marcus said, raising his champagne glass. "Judge Whitfield, who's dedicated her life to justice. To Jason, who just sold his company for more money than most of us will see in a lifetime. To Mr. Whitfield, who built his construction empire from nothing." He turned to our side. "To my family, Uncle Richard, who just made partner after 20 years of dedication. To Cousin Derek, who opened his second dental practice this year. To Dr. Sarah, saving lives as a pediatric surgeon." His eyes found mine. "And to family members who support us in their own special ways. My sister Emma, who flew all the way from Seattle to be here despite the expense. She works in food service, honest, necessary work, and we love her for her dedication to simpler values." The applause was polite but pointed. It was during the dancing portion that the real drama began. I'd stepped onto the terrace for some air when I overheard Patricia's mother speaking to Marcus near the bar. "Marcus, I need to ask you something directly," she said. "Is Emma financially stable? Patricia mentioned she might want Emma to be godmother to your children. And given her circumstances." Marcus laughed. "She's sweet, but she can barely take care of herself. Been at that grocery store 7 years now. Never got promoted. I think she's just not built for ambition, you know." Mrs. Whitfield sighed in relief. "We want our grandchildren to have the right kind of role models." "Don't worry," Marcus said. "Emma's basically the family charity case at this point. Mom sends her money for rent sometimes. We all chip in for her car payments." That wasn't true. I'd never asked for or received financial help from anyone in my family. But apparently, that was the story they told themselves to make sense of my modest lifestyle. I was about to turn away when I heard Derek's voice from around the corner. "Did you see Emma's car? It's like 15 years old. Marcus said she's been using food stamps." Someone snickered. "At least she seems happy," another voice said. "I guess ignorance is bliss," Derek replied. "She has no idea how far behind she's fallen." I'd heard enough. I pulled out my phone and texted David, my head of security. "Ready for pickup." His response came immediately. "Day 10 minutes. Helicopter fueled and ready." I made my way back to the ballroom, planning to slip out quietly. But as I reached the main table, Marcus tapped his champagne glass again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. "Patricia and I are so grateful to be surrounded by such successful, accomplished people. Our families represent the absolute best of what hard work and ambition can achieve." He gestured grandly around the room. We have entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, executives. People who've taken risks, pushed boundaries, refused to settle for less than excellence. His eyes found mine, that same pitying expression as before. But we're also grateful for family members who contribute in simpler ways. That was enough. I set down my glass, stood, and interrupted him for the first time in my life. Actually, Marcus, I said, my voice calm but carrying clearly across the room, I've decided to contribute in my own way tonight. The crowd turned. First, congratulations to you and Patricia. The wedding is beautiful. I especially love the Fairmont. Excellent choice. A murmur rippled through the guests. I almost bought this property 2 years ago, I added casually. But the acquisition price didn't make sense for my real estate portfolio. Silence. Patricia blinked. Marcus frowned. I should also mention, I continued, for anyone curious about my job situation, Anderson Global Logistics just finalized a merger valued at $1.8 billion this week. So if anyone's in need of distribution support, feel free to reach out. The quiet that followed was total. Even the band had stopped. Then I smiled. But please enjoy the evening. I have a flight to Singapore in an hour. I turned, handed my champagne glass to a stunned waiter, and walked out into the night air, the sound of whispers and shifting chairs behind me. By the time the helicopter lifted off from the hotel roof, the ballroom below was still buzzing. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. My sister Emma flew all the way from Seattle to be here tonight, Marcus began, his voice warm with self-satisfaction. Even though I know the cost was probably difficult for her budget. She works in food service. Honest, humble work. Not everyone can be a CEO or a surgeon, and that's perfectly okay. The applause had been polite but condescending. Several people looked at me with the kind of sympathy usually reserved for someone announcing a terminal diagnosis. Emma represents something important, Marcus continued, warming to his theme. In a world obsessed with achievement and status, she reminds us that there's dignity in simple work, value in modest goals. She's content with her life, and that's actually quite admirable. Patricia's father stood up, clearly feeling generous after several glasses of wine. To Emma, he called out, for showing us that happiness doesn't require success. The room raised their glasses to me like I was some kind of inspirational poster about overcoming limitations. I could see pity in their eyes, mixed with relief that their own children had turned out so much better. That's when my phone buzzed. Miss Anderson. The voice belonged to a tall man in an impeccable black suit who had appeared beside me without anyone noticing. David Martinez looked exactly like what he was. Former Secret Service, trained to handle threats to world leaders, now dedicated to protecting one of Seattle's most valuable executives. I'm David Martinez, your head of security, he said, his voice carrying just far enough for nearby tables to hear. I apologize for the interruption, but we have an urgent situation that requires your immediate attention. The conversations around us stopped. David had the kind of presence that commanded rooms. 6'2" of professional alertness and expensive tailoring. Security, Mrs. Whitfield repeated, confused. The helicopter is waiting on the roof, David continued smoothly. Your 9 p.m. conference call with the Singapore team cannot be delayed. The Chin Industries merger closes Monday morning, and the Tokyo markets open in 3 hours. The board is waiting for your final approval on the $1.8 billion acquisition. Marcus' champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. I'm sorry to cut this short, I said, standing and smoothing the terrible mustard dress. I try to keep business separate from family time, but unfortunately, international markets don't respect wedding schedules. Emma, what the hell is going on? Marcus grabbed my arm, his voice cracking slightly. David stepped closer, not threateningly, but with a kind of calm readiness that made it clear he was prepared for anything. Sir, I'll need you to step back from Miss Anderson. Miss Anderson. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. I looked around the room at all the faces staring at me, The same people who'd spent the entire evening discussing my supposed failures like I wasn't even there. I suppose I should explain, I said. My name is Emma Anderson, and I'm the founder and CEO of Anderson Global Logistics. We're the largest privately held supply chain management company in North America, with operations in 47 countries and annual revenue of $4.2 billion. The silence was absolute. The grocery store job Marcus mentioned, that's how I started. I worked nights at Safeway for 3 years while building my first distribution center during the day. I wanted to understand every aspect of food retail: customer behavior, inventory management, supply chain logistics, employee dynamics. Most executives learn that from consultants and spreadsheets. I learned it by scanning barcodes and stocking shelves. Derek's face went completely white. We handle distribution for about 30% of the Fortune 500, I continued. Walmart, Target, Kroger, Safeway. If you've bought groceries in the past 5 years, there's a good chance our systems got that food from farm to shelf. We revolutionized cold chain logistics for pharmaceutical companies, developed the algorithms that optimize delivery routes for Amazon's grocery division, and created the inventory management systems used by most major retailers. Mrs. Whitfield was staring at me like I'd just announced I was from another planet. Forbes ranked me 47th on their list of richest self-made women, I said. Though I prefer to focus on the fact that Anderson Global employs over 85,000 people worldwide and has been carbon neutral for 3 years running. Patricia found her voice first. Marcus, you said she worked at a grocery store. She does. Marcus stopped, blinking rapidly. She told me she worked in food retail. Food retail logistics, I clarified gently. I oversee supply chain operations for every major grocery chain in North America, plus expanding operations in Europe and Asia. When I said I worked in food retail, I meant I was revolutionizing how food gets from producers to consumers. Uncle Richard was staring into his bourbon like it might provide answers. The resume help you offered was very thoughtful, I said lightly. Though my current position is working out well. David checked his watch. Ms. Anderson, we really do need to leave. The Singapore call is critical. Chin Industries won't wait. If we miss this window, the merger could collapse. That's 18,000 jobs hanging in the balance. Of course. I turned to Marcus and Patricia. Congratulations again on your wedding. It's beautiful, and I wish you both every happiness. Wait. Marcus grabbed my arm again, then immediately let go when David shifted his stance. Emma, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Tell you what? That I was successful. Would it have mattered? Of course it would have mattered. Really? I said quietly. Because based on what I overheard tonight, you all seemed pretty comfortable with your version of who I was. The family charity case. The one who needed financial help. The sister who was too limited for real achievement. We never said you were learning disabled, Derek protested weakly. You literally said that 20 minutes ago on the terrace, I replied, along with speculating about my food stamp usage and expressing embarrassment about my car. Patricia's father was still staring at me in shock. You actually run a billion-dollar company? She's on the Forbes list, someone whispered from the back of the room. I turned to see one of the younger cousins holding up her phone. Emma Anderson, CEO of Anderson Global Logistics. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion. The murmur that followed was like watching dominoes fall. This doesn't make sense, Aunt Susan said, her voice almost accusatory. If you're so wealthy, why do you dress so modestly? Why drive an old car? Why live like a normal person? Because money isn't the most important thing in life, I said. I thought family was. I thought showing up for people you love mattered more than showing off your net worth. I thought being humble about success was a virtue. Marcus was shaking his head. But you let us think you were struggling. I didn't let you think anything, Marcus. You assumed. You all did. You decided that because I didn't brag about my accomplishments at every family gathering, I must not have any. You created an entire narrative about my life, complete with financial problems I don't have and limitations I've never shown, without ever asking me a single direct question about what I actually do. "But you said you worked in food retail," Patricia protested. "I said I worked in food retail logistics. When I mentioned supply chain management, you nodded politely and changed the subject. When I talked about hiring employees, you assumed I was managing a grocery store department. When I said I traveled for business, you figured it was for training shifts at other locations." The room was completely silent now, everyone processing the magnitude of their assumptions. "You know what's funny?" I added. 3 years ago when I missed Christmas, you all decided it was because I couldn't afford the plane ticket. The truth. I was in Tokyo, personally negotiating a contract that brought 2,000 manufacturing jobs back to the US. Last year when I couldn't make Derek's wedding, you assumed I was working extra shifts to make rent. Actually, I was in Germany, opening our newest facility that now employs 1,500 people. Derek looked like he might be sick. "Miss Anderson," David interrupted gently. "The helicopter." He nodded. "I really do have to go. Singapore doesn't wait, and there are a lot of people depending on this deal closing successfully." As I moved toward the exit, the crowd parted around me like I was visiting royalty. The same people who'd been pitying me 5 minutes ago were now staring with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. At the door I turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, Marcus," I said, "I hope you and Patricia are very happy together. Marriage should be about loving someone as they are, not as you assume they should be. Maybe that's something worth remembering." The elevator ride to the roof was silent except for the soft jazz playing through the speakers. David held the door as we stepped onto the hotel's helipad, where my pilot waited with the rotors already spinning. "How was the wedding, ma'am?" David asked, raising his voice over the noise. "Educational," I replied, buckling my seatbelt and putting on my headset. As we lifted off, I could see people gathered on the lower terraces, looking up at the helicopter with obvious confusion. My phone buzzed with calls and texts. Marcus, Derek, Aunt Susan, numbers I didn't recognize. I turned the phone off and looked out over the glittering city below. Tomorrow I'd be back to managing supply chains, board meetings, and the 1,000 small decisions that kept a global company running smoothly. Tonight had been a reminder of why I kept those worlds separate. But maybe it was time to stop hiding who I'd become. Maybe the people who truly mattered would love me anyway. And the ones who didn't, their approval was never worth having. "Singapore, ma'am?" the pilot asked through the headset. "Actually," I said, smiling faintly, "let's make a quick stop at the office first. I want to change out of this dress. It's terrible, and I have a feeling the Singapore meeting's going to be photographed." David smiled. "Yes, ma'am. I did mention that mustard yellow wasn't your color." As Seattle's skyline grew larger ahead of us, I found myself smiling for real. Tomorrow's business news would probably mention that Anderson Global's CEO made an unexpected helicopter exit from a family wedding. My PR team would field the inevitable questions about whether there was drama behind the departure. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt completely free to be exactly who I was. Successful, accomplished, and no longer willing to hide it to make other people comfortable. The funny thing was, I'd spent so much energy trying to be humble that I'd forgotten there's a difference between humility and invisibility. Maybe it was time to let the world, including my family, finally see what I'd built. After all, Anderson Global Logistics hadn't revolutionized supply chain management by staying quiet and hoping people would notice.